Well, I'm going to let Ready? Good evening. We're going to reconvene the City of Sugar Land City Council meeting. A little bit about our agenda tonight. In a minute, I'm going to recognize Councilmember Lane. She's going to take us through the invocation and the pledge. Following that, we're going to have a couple recognitions. I'll come down off the dais and we'll do those recognitions. So before I introduce Councilmember Lane, I'd like to recognize our Mayor's Youth Advisory Council. If I could ask them to please stand. And these are students that go through a program that's been in place now. This is what, Kayla, the 18th? 13th class that the City of Sugar Land's done. So these are the best and the brightest. Thank you all for coming tonight. Jennifer, you ready?
Good afternoon. You're invited to join me in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this beautiful day. Thank you for the opportunity for us to gather together today in freedom to discuss these matters and make decisions that are in our best interest for our city and community. I would like to take this opportunity to reflect upon how precious life is. We offer our prayers of comfort and healing for those families that have lost loved ones in the recent attacks on the mosque in New Zealand. This senseless tragedy left a whole country in mourning, and we mourn with them. The City of Sugar Land is a very special place in our world where the expression of one's religious beliefs are respected and held sacred. As we approach the spring season and we look around us and take in the beauty of our great city, we can see the small miracles of regeneration and new life in every blossom and tree sprout we see. As it is as if every year we are shown that we can expand and to be born into something new again. I pray for a shield of protection over our law enforcement and first responders, that they are able to perform their duties safely. I pray for all of our city staff that they come to work every day to participate as partners in creating the most innovative city in our nation. I pray for our citizens that they may continue to grow and prosper and live out beautiful lives in the City of Sugar Land. And I pray for our mayor and council members that we have the wisdom and right judgment to make the best decision for our city. Amen.
Amen.
And now for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ben, would you and Ms. Russell like to join me? Shannon, would you like to join us also, please? Shannon, I think you're going to introduce it for us, aren't you?
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I'd like to introduce Sugar Land residents Ben Davis and Charlene Russell. And we also have with us tonight Sonia Clausen. She's with the Greater Harris County 911 District. So I'm going to tell the backstory. One day last July, Ms. Russell decided to venture out into her backyard to water her vegetable garden. And she was using a walker due to a recent knee replacement. And as she was trying to maneuver the garden hose, she ended up tripping and falling and suffering a very serious injury. She was unable to move as she had shattered her femur bone. Her phone was on her porch well out of reach. And this was at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Monday. And she knew there was very little chance her neighbors were outside in July on a Monday, but she had no choice but to lay there and call and yell for help. Luckily, Ben came out of his house at about 3:30 in the afternoon that day. I believe it was the first time he was allowed outside because he was recovering from an ACL injury. And Ben heard Mrs. Russell's faint cries for help. He sensed that this was something very serious, so he took it upon himself to venture out and investigate. Going toward her voice, he crossed over several front yards and several backyards until he was peering over her back fence and saw her laying there. And she told him how to get into the backyard. Once he did, his first instinct was to use his body to shield her from the sun, being a hot July day. And then he proceeded to call 911 to get her the help that she needed. He stayed there with her until he heard the sirens approaching, and then he went out front to escort the responders back to Mrs. Russell. And we're very thankful that Ben heard her cries for help and was also brave enough to venture forth and find out what was going on and assist her. Had he not done that, who knows how long Mrs. Russell would have laid there until she got the help she needed, and who knows how much worse her condition might have been. So we are very pleased to honor Ben Davis tonight as a 911 hero.
It's on you, and then I'll.
Hi there, everyone. My name is Sonia Clausen, and I'm with Greater Harris County 911 Network. We provide the technology for all of our jurisdictions throughout Harris and Fort Bend County. And Ben is just the type of individual that we like to recognize and honor. He did something that a lot of adults wouldn't even think quickly enough to do. And so we're very pleased and would like to recognize him as well today and calling him our 911 Kid Hero in recognition of outstanding performance during a life-saving emergency, Greater Harris County 911 Emergency Network, and the City of Sugar Land, because he knew what to do, how to call 911, and what to say to get help in an emergency. Thank you very much, Ben.
And if I could get Miss Russell's brother and sister, or daughter and son down here, and then Ben's parents, if you guys could come down, please.
Ben has grown, but I haven't. When this happened with Ben, when Ben found me, I was taller than Ben. And now he is taller than me.
This is a certificate of recognition from the Office of the Mayor. This certificate of recognition is presented to Ben Davis, a 13-year-old resident Boy Scout, who was shooting a few hoops in his driveway on July 2nd, 2018, and heard someone's faint cries for help. 3 hours earlier, First Colony resident Charlene Russell was watering her garden and, with the aid of a walker, tripped and fell, shattering her femur. Young Ben Davis followed her cries for help several houses away, peered over the fence, saw Miss Russell lying down in her backyard. He quickly dialed 911, staying with his neighbor until she left in an ambulance. Ben, we want to thank you for the quick actions that you did in helping your neighbor, Miss Charlene Russell. Congratulations. If you guys could move over this way. Council, if we could get a picture. Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure.
Can I get Michael, Nico,
He's setting a good example for
Come on down, guys. Come on. No, that's okay.
This is his moment.
Yes, absolutely. He gets to do it with his friends. He didn't want to talk. No. Already tried. Here you go, guys. Get in here. Come on. Come on. Get over here with your buddy. There you go.
All right, everyone this way, please. All right, 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Ben, congratulations. Good job. There you go. Congratulations. Oh, yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We're going to give everybody just a brief moment to clear out. I think they're going to interview young Ben out in the hallway. The next item of recognition is the Public Works recipient, I'm in trouble with my P's tonight, of American Public Works Association, Texas Chapter, the 2019 In-House Project of the Year. And I'm going to ask that Donica Mueller, our Facility Operations Manager, come down and introduce the topic.
Thank you, Mayor Zimmerman. Thank you, members of the council, for recognition of this award tonight. The City of Sugar Land received this award from the Texas chapter of the American Public Works Association for their 2019 Best In-House Project Award. We received this for modifications that we made at our Riverstone groundwater plant. So prior to the surface water transmission line being completed out to this facility, we decided to convert that groundwater plant to a water boosting station, mainly to ensure that during construction, we could maintain adequate water supply out to the Riverstone area, primarily during dry summer months, high demand periods. The project was completed entirely in-house by our water utility staff, everything from the design, the planning, and the installation of the valves and the piping, but more importantly, the day-to-day operation of that facility, which took place for over a year and a half. So we were recognized by the Texas chapter of the American Public Works Association for that successful project. And I really do need to thank the staff that's here with me tonight, as well as there were several others that couldn't join us, but for making that project a success. So thank you very much.
Congratulations. Council, if we get you guys to step back and we'll get a picture. There you go. Here, I'll come on this side.
All right, everyone, look this way, please. 1, 2, 3. One more. Thank you.
Congratulations, guys. Thank you. Thank you. This is for any agenda item that's listed that does not have a public hearing. So if you'd like to comment on any of the remaining agenda items that doesn't have a public hearing, I'd ask you to come forward. We haven't had anybody sign up, have we, Thomas? First call, second call. We're going to move on now to item number 3, review of the consent agenda. Item number 4, the consent agenda. All of these items are considered routine business unless a council member decides to pull one of these items, at which time we'll take all the other items as one agenda item, and then staff will make a presentation on the item that was pulled. Council, do I have a motion? Got a motion by Councilmember Mitchell. Do I have a second? Second. Got a second by Councilmember Young. If you'll vote at this time, please. We'll do a hand vote. All in favor? Aye? Aye. The ayes have it. It's unanimous. It's a 7-0 vote. Item number 5, ordinances and resolutions. 5A, consideration of and action on City of Sugar Land Resolution Number 1906, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Sugar Land, Texas, adopting the Integrated Water Resource Plan to evaluate available water supplies and water supply infrastructure to meet future water demands and the regulatory requirements of the Fort Bend Subsidence District, and setting forth other provisions related thereto, and recognize members of the Integrated Water Resource Plan Citizen Task Force for their service. We have with us our own Katie Clayton, our Water Resources Manager. Katie.
Excited to be here this evening, the fourth of workshops and meetings with you reviewing the Integrated Water Resource Plan. I'd like to first start out by recognizing that we do have our Citizen Task Force here, and we'll be recognizing them after my presentation. We also have Amber Batson and Tina Peterson from CDM Smith who helped us through this process. On the agenda this evening, I'd like to start out by reviewing some of the information that we covered in the 3 workshops, and then like to address some of the questions from the previous workshop, and then last talk about the resolution language and the recommendations. So starting out back at workshop 1, if you remember, we talked about an integrated water resource plan, what that is, and this is, again, the roadmap for creating an integrated water resource plan. And through the 3 workshops, we've kind of talked through each of these tasks in more detail. Workshop 1, we focused on why an integrated water resource plan is unique in this in the water supply planning approaches, and why it was chosen for our city. And some of those reasons included the opportunity to recognize that for looking and evaluating future water supplies, we can look at aspects outside of just the costs for future water supplies, and recognize that for our community there are other aspects of water resource management that's important. We did that through the identification of 7 objectives, and the objectives are listed here on the right of this graphic: optimizing our water resources, providing reliable supplies, developing cost-effective solutions, promoting system efficiency, promoting equity, protecting the environment, and maintaining quality of life. And the second thing that we talked about during workshop 1, what was unique for an integrated water resource plan and very important for our success, was the community involvement aspect. And we did this through the creation of 2 task forces. We had a council task force and a citizen task force who met with us throughout the project. And the citizen task force, one of their major contributions was telling us how important each of these objectives were to them. So you can see here in the pie chart the objectives and their adopted percentages, their adopted weights for importance. And those weights then got carried through the analysis process. In workshop 2 was much more technical information. We talked about the Fort Bend Subsidence District and how groundwater is regulated in Fort Bend County, and how in 2025 those regulations will increase, and 60% of our 60% of our demands will have to be met through non-groundwater supplies. And so the city will have to start supplying and meeting demands in a different, we're going to have to change our process and how we provide water supplies. And that was really the driving force for this plan. We also talked in workshop 2 about developing a water systems model and using that initially to understand the shortfall in water supplies related to these groundwater regulations. And we identified, using this model, that under average weather conditions we were looking at a shortfall of 6 million gallons per day of non-groundwater supplies, and under dry weather conditions we would be looking for 11 million gallons per day. Then we discussed all the different ways that we could meet that shortfall. We evaluated 15 different water supply options through through this process that ranged from demand management projects that included advanced metering infrastructure, water loss control, and conservation. We looked at various ways that we could reuse water within our community through reclaimed wastewater. We looked at the various transmission and expansion of our surface water treatment plant, other new infrastructure projects, and innovative strategies for meeting these regulatory requirements. We also talked about how we took the water systems model and used it as a decision support model. So all of the information about the regulatory requirements, our projected demands, the objectives, and the various water supply options, all of that information was utilized through the decision support model to understand how these different options would perform within our community in the context of both meeting the regulatory requirements and our community's vision. In workshop 3, we talked about the results of that analysis, and we talked about this graphic shows visually the output of our decision support model. Each bar represents a unique set of those 15 water supply options, and the colors represent how well those options meet the various objectives for our community. So you can see the longer the bar, the more effective it is at meeting our community's vision. We went through this analysis process 36 different times, and we're able to learn from that effort that there were, of those 15 projects, there were a set that performed very well for our community, and there were some that did not perform as well. Detailing those that improved or performed well for our community were the projects that included demand management, advanced metering infrastructure, water loss control, and conservation, expanding our reclaimed water supply system, expanding our surface water plant, accessing the Brazos River Authority contract water through existing infrastructure at Gulf Coast Water Authority, and continuing to bank the groundwater credits program from the subsidence district. In workshop 3, we then talked about 2 different portfolios that were the top performing portfolios that were very different approaches, but included each of those projects that performed well. We talked about the surface water plant expansion of 11, which was a very simplified approach of expanding our surface water plant by 11 million gallons per day, bringing it to a capacity of approximately 22 million gallons per day. It's kind of a big stick approach to meeting these regulatory requirements. We also discussed Hybrid B, which included some of each of these projects that performed very well. It included the demand management, the reclaimed expansion of our north and south wastewater plants. It also included an expansion of our surface water plant, but it was more of a right-sized approach, 5.5 million gallon per day expansion. It would not limit us to expanding again, but we would start out with the 5.5 MGD expansion. And you can see there totaled at the bottom the 2 different alternative volumes supplied by these portfolios. So the plant expansion of 11 is on the high end of those regulatory needs that we identified, the 6 to 11 million gallons per day, and Hybrid B hits there kind of right in the middle of those needs. Then in workshop 3, expanding upon those 2 portfolios, we presented these simplified dashboards that evaluate or that show how well each of those portfolios meet our community's vision through the model score. It shows the financial impacts of each of those portfolios, as well as the risk associated with meeting the subsidence district regulations through the groundwater credit bank. We also laid out the pros and the cons of each of these portfolios, talking about how the plant expansion of 11 is a very reliable portfolio, and that it provides 11 million gallons per day of non-groundwater supplies, which is at the top of our needs during a drought, and that the capital costs were less. But we also talked about the pros and cons of Hybrid B, and that by diversifying our water supplies through these various projects, the expanding our reclaimed is a very localized approach and a very drought-resistant supply for our amenity lakes and for irrigation throughout our community. We talked about it also is an optimization of our water supplies where we're using the right water for the right use. This is water that otherwise would be returned to the Brazos River that we can continue to use within our community. It focuses on our system efficiency of our city through the water loss program and the AMI programs, and better reducing losses within our distribution system. All of that being said, we concluded with Workshop 3 in the recommendation of the Hybrid B portfolio that would expand our surface water treatment plant by 5.5 million gallons per day, which would make up the bulk of our regulatory compliance under average weather conditions. It would also include expanding reclaimed water facilities at both the south and the north wastewater plants, and then focus on those demand management projects of basic conservation, which is a voluntary program for our residents, looking at opportunities to reduce both indoor and outdoor water demands, as well as advanced metering infrastructure and water loss control. We also talked about how the implementation plan for this portfolio would allow us to phase these projects through time. So we would start out and ensure that the surface water plant expansion was online by 2025, and then be able to phase those other projects in as we see the need. Following up on some questions that were raised at Workshop 3, there were questions specific to cost, and specifically the rate impacts from each of those portfolios, the Hybrid B approach and the plant expansion of 11. And I want to recognize again that while it wasn't within the scope of this project to perform a complete utility rate study, cost certainly wasn't ignored in the analysis. It did make up as one of the top objectives for our community and weighted at 15%. And we did spend time both with our council and our citizen task force talking about cost, and again, recognizing that we didn't have the ability to understand the full rate impacts. We did make some rough analysis of those impacts to our customers. Expanding upon the dashboard that I showed earlier, you can see under the financial impacts, we did estimate the monthly bill impact to our resident. You can see the difference between those two. For the surface water plant expansion of 11, we estimated the water portion of the monthly bill to be $7.38 increase on that, on your current water bill. And for Hybrid B, we estimated that the monthly bill impact would be 27 cents higher at $7.65. To expand on that a little bit and how we came up with that volume, we, while we didn't have the ability to do a full utility rate analysis, we did have information about the portfolio cost, and we did have some information about the volume of water that we anticipated to be sold or delivered to our customers. So for the annual portfolio cost, we had the capital improvement plan, or the capital project of each of those projects, and we annualized those based off of our financial policy. We had the operation and maintenance costs annually, as well as the lost revenue cost. So the sum of those we used as the annual portfolio cost, and divided that by the volume of water delivered. So based off of our demands that we were projecting for all of our groundwater reduction program participants, we were able to come up with $1 per 1,000 gallons. We took that information and applied that to our residential accounts. So looking at the 5/8 and 3/4 inch meters, which make up 75% of our meters, the average consumption in 2017 was about 7,800 gallons per month. So applying that information to the bill, we were able to come up with the current water portion of our bill is $30.38 based off of that 7,800 gallons. Applying those costs of the annual portfolio, those planning level costs, the surface water plant expansion would increase that bill to $37.76, and Hybrid B would come out to $38.03. And we presented this both to our council and citizen task force as a way to gauge, recognizing, again, that it's not a utility rate study, but we wanted to give them some understanding of how this would impact them, and also recognizing that this is a regulatory requirement and there's not an option to do nothing. We do have to do something. Is the difference between these two portfolios significant enough to change the direction of the recommendations? And presenting that to both of the task forces, we didn't receive any negative feedback. So with that, I'd like to offer Tricia Frederick, our chairperson for the Citizen Task Force, to say a couple words on the recommendations.
Good evening, Mayor and
Hey,
council
Tricia.
members. It is an honor to be here alongside the other members of the Citizen Task Force. We are a 14-member group responsible for developing the objective weights, providing feedback on the options discussed, and providing feedback on the final framework of this study. The Citizens Task Force, we met on a monthly basis over a period of 24 months. As previously discussed, the priority objectives of the task force were to provide reliable water supply, to optimize water resources, and to promote system efficiency. And after review of the portfolio of projects and projected cost, the Citizen Task Force agrees with the Hybrid B portfolio because, one, it provides necessary resources to fulfill the requirements of the Fort Bend Subsidence District, which is to be on 60% alternative resources by 2025, and then also because of the diversity of the projects in the portfolio. Again, on behalf of the Citizen Task Force, I would like to thank you, council, and the mayor for including the residents of the city of Sugar Land in this study. Thank you.
Thank you.
So from that, I was going to move into the resolution language and review that with you. The resolution recognizes both the citizen and the council task force input in the plan development. It also outlines the key recommendations of developing the water utility rate study, implementation of advanced metering infrastructure, expanded reclaimed water infrastructure at both the north and the south wastewater treatment plants, expanding the surface water treatment plant and transmission system, accessing the Brazos River water through the Gulf Coast Water Authority's infrastructure, development of water supply, credit banking policy, and continued focused efforts on controlling water loss. And with that, it would adopt the integrated water resource plan moving forward. I want to again acknowledge what it does and doesn't do. It acknowledges the work performed by both of the task force, highlights the key recommendations, and would adopt the IWRP as the final action, but it does not authorize any spending moving forward. The city would be coming back to you asking for for future spending and the capital projects. It doesn't force any future council action or limit the city's options in the future, nor does it quantify future rates. So with that, the recommendation from the Public Works Department is to recommend approval of Resolution 19-06, adopting the Integrated Water Resource Plan to evaluate available water supplies and water supply infrastructure to meet future water demands and the regulatory requirements of the Fort Bend Subsidence District. Take any questions?
Thank you, Katie. Katie, I'd like to, in a minute, I'm going to turn over the podium to our Mayor Pro Tem, Bridget Young. Before I leave, I want to thank the task force for the good work that you all did. 2+ years. I want to thank not only you all, Katie, you and your staff. I want to thank Councilmember Porter and Councilmember Gandhi, who are the two members from council that worked so hard on this. And I'd like to ask Steve, Hamesh, if you guys would like to speak. And Mayor Pro Tem Bridget Young, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I want to first really take a minute to address the Citizens Task Force. You all put in a significant amount of time over a lengthy period with very, very technical data. And you also were part of a process that very few cities in America have done. So this is going to be a model that other cities are going to look at, and they're probably going to emulate, because I believe we've put together an awesome document. And this document's not going to just help the current council, it's going to help future councils and future mayors as they make decisions that impact the water in our state and in our city. So each of you who are involved in that process, each of you, the task force members, I want you to really understand that how appreciative all of us, the council members, the task force, the mayor, all of us are so proud of the fact that you all just spent an incredible amount of time taking voluntary time out of your schedules to do this. And I think this is going to be a plan that is really going to be amazing. I'm fully supportive of everything that we put into this plan. And I'll go ahead and make the first motion to approve.
Thank you, Councilmember Porter. Councilmember Gandhi. Councilmember Porter?
Thank you, I think the principal things to remember about this is the state of Texas is forcing the city into upgrades, switching water supplies. We didn't dream this up. Secondly, the state continues to have a large immigration, maybe 1,000 people a day. We're not making any more water, so water is going to be more expensive no matter what we do. There were lots of alternatives, and it's difficult to choose between the various goals. And so I thank the citizens for telling us what they would like to do, what things they value, what things that they think are more important, and it's guidance, and I very much appreciate that. So I also fully support your recommendation, and thank you for your hard work, and I would like to second the motion.
Thank you. Before we move forward with the motions, I'd like to see if any of the other council members have any questions. Councilmember Mitchell?
First of all, Katie, we've talked about the IWRP Citizen Task Force, but we haven't actually met them. Could you please?
We're going to do that in a minute, Amy.
Oh, we will?
Yeah.
Okay, because I thought we were done with the presentation. So then my question for you, and I'm just trying to wrap my head around this, there's a $27 million difference between the hybrid plan and the surface water plant 11, or I guess it's an 11 and not a Roman numeral 2. And I'm trying to figure out how a $27 million difference winds up only being 27 cents per person. Is there some other bill that we would also be looking at that would be affected by this, or is this the only bill that we would be looking at that would affect our community?
This was related to we applied this value to the surface water fee because it is related to the groundwater reduction plan. So when you spread it out over the entirety of our community and all of our groundwater participants, that is the difference that we see on the residential bill.
Would there be other bills that would be affected other than the surface water plant fee?
No.
No other part of the water bill is going to go up, no other utility bill is going to go up, and just the only thing that would be going up would be the surface water plant fee.
Related to the projects from this plan,
From
yes.
Hybrid B.
Right.
Okay, I just want to make sure, because 27 cents just doesn't sound like a lot of difference when we're talking about 27 million, and so I'm trying to make sure there's
Right.
nothing we're leaving out here.
Certainly, the utility rate study will evaluate all of the aspects of the bill, and there's much more that goes into that plan or that study than just these projects. And I don't know that I can speak to the entirety of what goes into a utility rate study, but what we were looking at was for the surface water, the groundwater reduction program.
So after the utility study, if it comes out that there's really a significant difference, can we backpedal, or we're going forward with Hybrid B after the utility study, even if it shows that there is a significant impact, a greater impact than 27 cents? I'm just trying to protect the residents, and I want to make sure we're
Right,
covering
that difference is related to the project specific to this plan. So there shouldn't be any changes to any of the other utility rates from this plan.
Okay, because that was always my concern, is what is the impact to our residents? And you're saying the difference, we have to do this, One of them is more diversified, which I completely understand, and I think that's a good thing to have diversification and not rely on one thing. But if the cost was tremendous, I was having problems. And you're saying the total cost difference between the two, based on your analysis, is 27 cents
Based
per-
off of, yes, ma'am, based off of these planning level, the information that we had. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, well then I really appreciate you're going to answer that question, because I'm the one who raised it, because I was the one who was concerned. And that gives me a whole lot more comfort in what we're doing, because we don't have a choice. But I don't want to first do no harm, don't want to harm our homeowners and residents. Thank you very much. That was the only
Thank you.
clarifying
Any other
question.
questions? Okay, I have a motion from Councilmember Gandhi, a second from Councilmember Porter. All voted this.
One point of clarification.
Uh-huh.
There is no appropriations that are tied to this. So in the future council members can decide to not fund any portion of this or cut out anything that the climate or the times may change in the future. So we're not bound by, really, this is a guiding document, but the decisions of funding and appropriations are going to take place at the council level. So.
I know, but very often these things become the Bible. And if it's the Bible, people follow it. So if we lay the predicate, they're going to follow it looking at this pretty much as the Bible. So, yeah, they don't have to, but more likely than not, just as we have done, they will follow whatever our recommendations were here. So I'm trying to just make sure, but the question certainly answered my concerns. So.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Councilmember Cutchin.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, Madam Pro Tem. Anyway, I'd like to thank the city for being so proactive at looking at our future water demands. And I said this truly is a model for other cities that will be followed. And to the Citizen Task Force, I just want to commend you for your dedication for the past 2 years that you've given to looking at our future water supplies. So thank you very much.
Going to vote at this time? In a minute, after the vote. Okay, let's go ahead and do a hand vote this time. If you're all in favor, raise your right hand, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. And at this time, I would like to come down to the front so we can recognize Councilmember Mitchell. Thank you. And at first, I'd like to recognize our staff. And so if you could come up, Katie's already up here. Katie's our Water Resource Manager. Rob Venezuela, come on up. Rob is our Director of Public Works, and Brian Bouchard is the Assistant Director of Public Works. And then if all of you would come up, we're going to introduce you if you don't mind coming up. And also, we'd like our Councilmember Gandhi and Councilmember Porter to come down and join us. The members of the IWRP Citizen Task Force, who represents a wide range of interests and backgrounds, were appointed in March 21st, 2017. This task force's success relied heavily on the input of the community through this task force. And let me move out of your way. Over the past 2 years, the task force has participated in community dialogue and in the education process regarding water resource management and provided their feedback to the city staff in numerous meetings. So for their time and service, we'd like to recognize the task force tonight, as their participation made the creation of the Integrated Water Resource Plan a success. So at this time, we actually have some individual recognitions for each of you, and Katie is going to call your name.
Sure. I'm going to step over here, stand out of the way. Tricia Frederick, who served as our chairperson. Jimmy Goldman, who I don't believe is here this evening, but he served as our vice chair. Ann DeStefano. She's got a certificate for you. Basir Pirzada. Bruce Lowry. Thank you. Chuck Huell, who wasn't able to make it this evening. Elizabeth Bryson also wasn't able to make it. Inyat Zarian. Thank you. Leo Weinberg. Thank you. Megan Ortiz. Michaela Lim, who wasn't able to make it. Poonam Mathur. Ruth Barrett. And Shauri Nandajiri. Yes, picture, please.
Read what your little proclamation says. So this certificate of recognition is presented to all of you for having served the Sugar Land community on the Citizen Task Force of the Integrated Water Resource Plan. The community feedback was critical to the success of the process, and it is clear the task force input impacted the community's long-range plans in a positive way. The city began proactive planning for future groundwater regulations from the Fort Bend Subsidence District through the development of the IWRP. The importance of the citizens' involvement was recognized early and captured through a citizens task force appointed by the City Council on March 21, 2017. The Citizens Task Force had three main tasks: to evaluate the objectiveness of the plan and provide feedback on the relative importance, to provide feedback on options such as project programs and management policies from water supplies, and to provide feedback on the final framework of the plan. The Citizen Task Force met multiple times throughout the project with the completion in March of 2019. And once again, the city greatly appreciates all the hard work you put into this plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you for all your hard work. So
thank
appreciate
you.
it. Yes.
Thank
So,
you.
nice to see you. Yep.
I bet the task force is glad that's over.
No comment, Mayor.
Okay. At this time, we're going to move on to item 5B, first consideration of an action on the City of Sugar Land Ordinance 2151, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Sugar Land, Texas, amending Chapter 8 of the Sugar Land Development Code regarding flood management reduction regulations by adopting the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Atlas 14, Precipitation Frequency Atlas of the United States, Volume 2, Version 2.0, Texas, and setting forth other provisions related hereto. Jorge Alba, who is Senior Engineering Manager. Jorge?
Thank you very much. Good evening, council members. Just 1 second, yeah. So you can hear me. All right, thank you very much, yes. So if you remember, back in October 23rd, 2018, the engineering department conducted a workshop to City Council when we actually went over Atlas 14, and we kind of explained a little bit, or explained in detail actually what it means and what impact it was going to have in the city. So I'm just going to remind some of those important points so you come back to our memory. But Atlas 14 was a study commissioned by the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, and it was published, volume 11, which is the one that is pertinent to Texas, was published on September 2018. What it does is updates the statistical rainfall events that we use in the city for infrastructure design and floodplain mapping. What it does is the 100-year event or the 1% event increases from 12.5 inches in 24 hours to 16.5 inches in 24 hours. In other words, 12.5 inches of rain increases from 1% probability of happening in a given year to a 4% chance of happening in a given year. That means that we are going to be receiving larger storms events more often in the city. So Atlas 14, what it did is replace the technical paper number 40 that has been in use since 1961. So there are three criteria that we use in the city to define the finished floor elevation for the buildings in the city. Those three criteria are the 100-year base flood elevation, the top of curb, and the natural ground. In our current regulations, we require that any building in the city, the finished floor elevation of any building has to be at 1 foot above the 100-year base flood elevation. That is the existing FEMA, or what is called the effective FEMA floodplain map, the effective FEMA base flood elevation. Or also have to be 1 foot above top of curb or 1.5 feet above natural ground, whichever is the highest elevation. That's what our current design criteria require. What we are proposing in the regulation is that the finished floor elevation for new development and redevelopment in the city, only new development and redevelopment, be 2 feet above the Atlas 14 100-year base floor elevation. And in the absence of Atlas 14 base floor elevation that we don't have all over the city, we are going to use the 500-year FEMA effective water surface elevation, which is very similar. And we are going to have the remaining two criteria the same, 1 foot above top of curb and 1.5 foot above natural ground. And I'll explain in more detail why we are proposing it like that. But first of all, we are going to compare what other cities and other agencies are doing around us. Fort Bend County is basically going to require the same 2 feet above the finished floor elevation. 2 feet above the Atlas 14 100-year for the finished floor elevation. They are going to use a finished floor elevation above top of curve of 2 feet and 2 feet above natural ground. And the reason is because there are many areas, larger areas in the county that are not in the FEMA floodplain map, and they have no other way to regulate that elevation. In the city, we have completed many drainage studies and many drainage models, so we have a very good best available information about the base floor elevation that we have in the city. Therefore, we propose to maintain the finished floor elevation with respect to the top of curb and with respect to the natural ground elevation with the same criteria that we currently have. I'm going to skip, but basically Missouri City, which is our neighbor city, is adopting the same criteria for Fort Bend County. Harris County also adopted the 2 feet above the 500-year. They are calling it the 500-year effective, and same with City of Houston. So everybody around us is basically adopting very similar regulations. That's what we are proposing. So we conducted, after our initial workshop with City Council, we conducted an evaluation about the impact of the proposed regulations, the proposed modifications to the design criteria in different locations around the city, basically to determine what are the critical areas or the critical factors at each different location. And again, I'm going to remind them they are the Atlas 14 100-year base floor elevation, the natural ground elevation, and the top of curb. So what we found after we conducted this analysis is that there are only 2 areas in the city that are currently in the 500-year floodplain map that most likely probably are going to be included in the 100-year FEMA floodplain map once FEMA adopted the Atlas 14 and redo the mapping. These areas actually are going to be impacted in different ways. They won't be impacted exactly the same way. The blue area to your left, that's correct, corresponds mostly to track 2. The finished floor elevation in this area is going to be controlled by the base flood elevation of the Atlas 14 100-year. Everywhere else in the city, including what I mark in red, but I'm going to explain why I marked the area in red, basically is controlled by the finished floor elevation will be controlled by the natural ground. So in the areas that base flood elevation controlling, if you remember in the map, in the red area, as an example, track 2, the finished floor elevation is going to be 2 feet above the Atlas 1400 year BFE. So that elevation is currently going to be, the Atlas 1400 year BFE is 83 feet. The natural ground in that area is 80.5 feet. That means that when we add 2 feet to the 100-year BFE, the elevation will be 85. If we only add 1.5 feet to the natural ground, will be 82, which means base flood elevation is controlling the finished floor elevation in this particular area of the city. And just to remind you, according to our current ordinance, require that no storm water can sheet flow from outside the property boundaries. So it has to be maintained with the property boundaries before it's discharged into the proper discharge point. Now, in the areas, and I'm going back to the map here, the red area right over there, and the rest part, the remaining part of the city.
Can you identify what subdivisions those red areas are?
The red areas in mostly the Venetian Estates, Horseshoe Lake, and those areas around there.
Is Sugar Creek also
Sugar
included?
Creek, the golf course only.
Yeah.
And some border
Can you go
neighborhoods
back
around,
to it?
yes. Some border neighborhoods around the golf club in that area of Sugar Creek.
And it looks like there's a lake there, is that?
That's
like
correct,
Uni-
and that's what is mapped in the 500 year currently, because
Yeah.
it's basically.
Is that
it's
like
it's a water
Unical,
area.
where the Unical building was, right
Correct.
there, Sugar
That
Creek?
is correct, right. So that area, again, that area and the remaining area, which is basically the levee protected areas, are natural ground control. So what is going to be controlling there, the final finished floor elevation, is the natural ground. But let me explain why I mark it in red. So, and I just lost track here. So before I get there. So in these areas that I call natural ground is the controlling factor, there is not going to be change in the city's design criteria. Basically, we are going to still require 1.5 foot or 18 inches above natural ground for that finished floor elevation. So the reason I mark those areas in red is because in the case that once FEMA remap in few years or create the new floodplain map, there is potential for some insurance rate increase in some of those areas. But that rate increase is only going to happen on those existing homes that are built below the new Atlas 100-year base flood elevation. Not every single home there is already below. I mean, some homes are already above the 500 years, so any home that is built above the Atlas 1400 year won't be impacted by this. Now, we will inform the city, inform the community in these areas once FEMA start working on a remap if there is a possibility of a increase in the rate flow, in the insurance rate in those areas. Now, the city, we encourage our residents to purchase flood insurance no matter what. So what we have been doing since our October 28 workshop is we did that analysis in the different parts of the city to kind of see the impact. We have been informing our residents, the developers, we have been meetings with the builders also to basically inform them of possible changes in the design standards, changes to the development code, and once FEMA do the floodplain mapping or update the floodplain mapping, possible modifications to the floodplain map. We have been doing this using the city website. We actually created an Atlas 14 webpage within the city website that you probably have seen it. We have been doing presentations to the HOAs, presentations to also some of the levee improvement districts, presentations to the developers. We have been emailing, actually meetings with the builders and the developers, and we have been also meeting with our inspectors actually to basically keep them informed of what changes we are going to have. So in terms of the recommendation, the engineering department and the legal department would like to recommend the adoptions of Ordinance 2151, formally adopting Atlas 14, Volume 11, and amending Chapter 8, Article 1, Section 8-3.9 of the City of Sugar Land Development Code to reference the same. So is City Council have any question?
Okay, Jorge, before we move on to questions, would you please go back to the map? I think some of us are confused.
This one here.
Okay. So we have two different areas. One is Track 2. Can
One is
you
correct.
talk about how Track 2 is impacted by this?
It's impacted it's an undeveloped area currently.
I'm sorry?
It's undeveloped, it's completely undeveloped.
Right, we understand that.
It's impacted in the sense that once, basically all this area is currently under in the 500-year floodplain map. Once we update it, or once FEMA map this into Atlas 14, all this area is going to be in the 100-year floodplain map. So basically, the required finished floor elevation here has to be 2 feet above that 100-year, that new Atlas 14 100-year base flood elevation.
Okay, now the area in.
The area in red is the other area that may be impacted, but is not necessarily from the point of view of flooding, may be impacted only from the point of view that some homes in this area may be mapped in the floodplain, or are going to be probably mapped in the floodplain. If they are not built high enough, the flood elevation, the finished floor elevation is not high enough, they may be required by FEMA to buy flood insurance.
Okay, and then new homes that are built in this area, in the orange area, what will that be required of them?
If they build, according to our code, and again, we are not changing that part, 18 inches above natural ground, they will be above the 100-year, and they won't be required to purchase floodplain insurance.
Okay. And
now,
so,
floodplain insurance is only required by FEMA for people who have a mortgage on the home. If you fully own the home, you are not required to buy flood insurance.
okay. And how did you say we were going to get this information out to the public?
So we have been already communicating with several of the HOAs that have their annual meeting. We have been out there bringing this information. We are going to actually attend every single HOA meeting. We already have in our city website, and we're going to start actually communicating more directly with all the residents. And we already communicating with developers and with builders, which are probably the ones are going to see the changes immediately. We are working with our permitting group in the city, so they are also aware that these changes are coming and how to apply these changes and how to regulate for these changes.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll open it up for questions. Councilmember Mitchell?
Jorge, I just want to make sure. Thank you. I want to make sure I understand what you're saying, because the purple area, I got it. It's not built yet. They got to build it 2 feet up. But the red area, it's pretty much built out. And I believe there could be a house which is not 2 feet up, but then the next house right next to it could be 2 feet up. And each house is going to be different. And how are we going to let specific homeowners know that they're going to be affected by this? Because the house that's in the red area, Venetian Estates, Councilmember Young, whomever, how are we going to let the specific house that's not 2 feet up know that their rates are going to be increased? Just telling broadly, well, it may, is not the same thing exactly.
2 things. In this area in particular is natural ground control. So it's only 1.5 feet.
A 1.5? Okay.
1.5, because all this area is below the 500-year or the 100-year Atlas 14 BFE anyway.
Okay.
The natural ground is below, so they only have to build 1.5 feet above natural ground.
Do we have any idea of how many houses are actually going to
We
be?
will have to go and survey house by house. That's what I personally went out there and surveyed several homes. There are homes that are above, there are homes that are right borderline, so that's what I won't say they will be necessarily. That has to be actually surveyed by a registered surveyor in the state of Texas that will basically provide, it's called an elevation certificate, and it's a legal document too. And that's what the homeowners use to show FEMA that they are not in the floodplain or they are in the floodplain.
Are we going to do anything to help homeowners know if they need to do that? In other words, the house that's more than 1.5 feet up doesn't need to go hire a surveyor because they're already 1.5 feet up. And if we've already measured it, we know that, we can tell them that, and they don't have to. But is the city in any way going to assist these homeowners in these affected areas, or do they each have to, on their own, once they're in the red area, go get a survey to figure it out?
We will communicate that once FEMA start working on the update of the floodplain map, and I think we did that, the same thing the city did back in 2014 in our last update when we started identifying areas that could be mapped into the flood zone that were not in the flood zone before.
Okay.
So I believe that will be something very similar to what we did in the past, like we did
So we're
in
going to
2014.
try and assist, and ultimately, it's their responsibility to know if they're
That is
within
correct.
if they're above the 1.5 feet or not, but we in some way are going to assist them in finding out if they are.
That is correct. But at least we are going to make sure that anybody redeveloping a lot or building a new home will be at least at the minimum elevation that is required.
I'm kind of more concerned about the people who are already there, not the people building the new homes, because the people who are already there could be blindsided. And I just want them to have the information to
Would-
know specifically, oh dear, my house now is in a flood zone when it wasn't a year ago or a
Correct.
day
We'll
ago.
provide that. But that won't happen at least for, we don't know exactly when FEMA is going to do the remapping, but it won't be in the very short term. It will be probably 4 years or more.
4 more years? Okay. Well, I appreciate you bringing this to us. I think it is really important, and I certainly think if everybody else is doing it, they're doing it for the same good reasons you're talking about doing it. So thank you.
Councilmember Gandhi?
So I too share a lot of the same concerns that Councilmember Mitchell brought up relative to the fact that Venetian Estates, which is listed in there, is a neighborhood that's going through a significant gentrification process, and there's a lot of new homes being torn down and built back up. But from what I'm hearing, none of this is really going to matter until FEMA does their maps, which you're saying or suggesting that it'll probably be in 4 years, right?
At least sometime, yes.
So if someone is going through a process of building a new home now, do they need to, will they need to adjust in accordance with the new build policy?
Most homes in this area, at least the ones I observed there, they are built almost flush with the natural ground. And remember, they were built much before we have this criteria in place. Our existing criteria, so even if it happened today, is that they have to rebuild 1.5 foot above natural ground anyway.
Okay.
Because this is effective in April 2019.
April 2000, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so I know you've already heard this, but I think it's going to be critically important to communicate this, especially to those areas, not the Track 2 because there's very little development, but especially in those residential areas, Venetian Estates, Alkire, Oyster Creek, whoever else was in that map. But I think we need to make that communication robust, because I can tell you this is going to be news to a lot of people.
Correct.
Thank you.
Councilmember Porter?
Thank you. Just to kind of summarize, if we went to a homeowner and said, oh, by the way, you're now in the flood zone, and they say to us, well, wait, I thought Harvey was a 500 or 1,000 year event, and I didn't get flooded.
Why
am I now in the flood zone when Harvey didn't flood me? So I think we need to have a very clear answer to that question, because a lot of people are going to be asking.
Correct. Well, there are two things here. The first one is from the pure floodplain mapping point of view. This is just an insurance boundary that the federal government draw based on some hydraulic analysis to determine what are the areas of most risk of flooding. And that's the way they delimit these areas here. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, the standard of rain that was used before was 12.5 inches to determine the 100-year flood elevation. Now we are using 16.5 inches, so we are using a much wider floodplain map to determine flooding areas. But that's from the mapping point of view. But from the really what happened is Harvey was an event that we got on top of 36 inches of rain, but that was spread in a period of 4 days. For the 100-year where his map is those 16.5 inches of rain in a period of 24 hours. So we're going to see a much higher peak of flood of water coming into our city, and dissipates it faster too, but what will flood people will be the volume of water that will hit that peak. So
Yeah, I think it'd be there were a lot of people in like Venetian that the water got pretty close to their houses, but it didn't get in.
But
I think that's going to be a kind of counterintuitive discussion.
Correct.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, Ms. Councilmember Mitchell?
Chimney Stone and Settlers Park were the hardest hit by Harvey,
Correct.
and they're both in District 3. Or actually, Chimney Stone's in District 4, and Settlers Park is in District 3. And neither one of these is going to have their flood zone altered, even though they did flood. Yeah, I understand what Mr. Porter's point is if those other areas didn't flood and the areas that did flood don't change, how do we explain it?
So we did analyze those areas too, obviously. We went there. They are also not natural ground control. However, what happened in Lead 2, if you remember, the maximum ponding elevation that the lead got, or that area got during Harvey was 65.5 feet of water. Okay, that was what the lead was able to control. Most home floodeds were actually below 65 feet. That's what they got flooded. Most of them only 6 inches or a little bit more than that. Lead number 2 actually is going to install, it's doing 2 things actually that are going to impact the area directly. One is they are working on improvement to all their drainage channels, including channel Dish C, which is the one that comes down parallel to Settlers Park and all those neighborhoods that flooded. That's going to help tremendously in terms of the flooding capacity of or controlling that. But also they are going to start building a new pump station. That what it's doing is going to lower that maximum ponding elevation for the entire Lead 2 area, well, for the drainage area that pumps out of pump A, because there is another area that pumps out of pump F. But the drainage area that pumps out of pump A is going to be lower from 65.5 to 64, I have the number here, 64.4. So what they are going to warranty is that every single home in Lead 2 will have at least 18 inches of freeboard.
And
That plus what we are going to start enforcing, the 1.5 foot for new development or redevelopment, 18 inches above the natural ground, that will give people all the protection they need during a big storm.
And that's, I just wanted that on the record as to why. Now, my next question is if we didn't do this, FEMA's still going to come and make those changes, and the rates are still going to go up, because all we're doing is what's consistent with what FEMA's saying. What we're doing is proactive and helping our residents by enacting something which protects them, because ultimately the end result is with FEMA coming in, these same areas are going to have the increases, and they could get flooded, and this makes sure that we're taking care of our residents.
That's correct.
Thank you.
And thank you, Councilmember Mitchell, because I think that's very well said, and I think that's an important thing to note, is that this is the federal government coming in and doing these maps. It's not something that the city of Sugar Land is doing. We are simply being proactive to help our residents. So hopefully that helps some, but we do have to have a good communication plan. I think that's important. So at this time, I'll entertain a motion. Thank you, Councilmember Mitchell. Thank you, Councilmember McCutcheon. Is there any further discussion? Okay, Councilmember McCutcheon.
Yes, just again wanted to comment that this is another example of how our city is proactively looking after our citizens, just like that we did on the Integrated Water Resource Task Force. And I think we just have a lot to be proud of here in Sugar Land. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll vote at this time. We're going to go ahead and do a hand vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, carries unanimously. We're going to move on to 5C, first consideration of an action on the City of Sugar Land Ordinance Number 2154, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Sugar Land, Texas, amending Chapter 2, Article 5, Division 4, Section 2-136 of the Code of Ordinances, City of Sugar Land, Texas, by adding a microchip fee, amending Chapter 3, Article 2, and the Code of Ordinances, the City of Sugar Land, Texas, relating to animal services and providing penalties and culpable mental state for violations of Chapter 3, Article 2 of the Code of Ordinances. Catherine Ketchen, Animal Services Manager.
I'm glad you had to say all that and not me. Mayor Pro Tem Council. I'm first going to apologize because kitten season started yesterday, and I got my first round of foster kittens. So after feeding every 2 hours, I don't know how with it I am at this point. So try to get through this. So as you know, we did some modifications to Chapter 3 Code of Ordinances. We initially started working with our Animal Advisory Board back in 2017 with their expansion. They reviewed our ordinances again with the expanded Animal Advisory Board in 2018. The Animal Advisory Board approved the proposed ordinance modifications at their meeting on February 13th and recommended they be presented to City Council for review and approval. The ordinance were also reviewed with our Animal Task Force, our Council Animal Task Force, on February 22nd, who supported the approval of the proposed ordinance modifications. We then held a workshop at City Council on March 5th, and we had a couple follow-up questions regarding the number of livestock allowed on the acreage. We have gone back and changed that verbiage to read acreage requirement clarified to be a minimum of 2 acres. We also re-examined the ordinance penalties. We are going to stand by that being located in Section 1-9, general penalty for violations of code. These violations are punishable by a fine not exceeding $2,000 for violations related to fire safety, zoning, and public health, and not exceeding $500 for all other violations, which is where our ordinance violations for our section fall. Each day a violation continues to be a separate offense. With that, I'm going to go quickly through what you have already seen. Again, these ordinance modifications were focusing on updates to definitions, clarifications of the section of code, and the ability to ensure prosecution of offenses. So we revised the definitions of dangerous dog, livestock, and wild animals. We added the definitions of domestic animal, humane live trap, microchip implant, pest control, what a rabies certificate should look like, and restraint. Modifications to the actual code include keeping of dogs and cats and household pets. Again, a rescue group or individual can register with the city to be over that limit. Keeping of livestock, fowl, and rabbits, again, we made reference that the M zoning allowance be removed for clarification. Restraint of animals, clarification that no animal may be restrained if left unattended. Provisions for animals, it is unlawful to leave the animal on property in a manner that may cause injury, in unhealthy conditions, or without making reasonable arrangements for care. Enclosure of animals in parked cars, it's unlawful to leave, place, or confine an animal in a motor vehicle, trailer, as to endanger its health, safety, and welfare. A whole section was included on humane trapping. Again, these humane traps are used for dogs, cats, small nuisance wildlife. Traps must be checked at least every 4 hours or every 8 hours if left overnight. An animal may not remain in a trap longer than 24 hours. Protection from the weather must be provided. It is unlawful for a person to remove, damage, or tamper with a city-owned trap without consent. Vaccination of dogs and cats. Clarification that an animal must wear a tag showing that it has been vaccinated for rabies. Requires an owner to provide a current rabies vaccination certificate upon request or prior or within 10 days after release from impoundment at the shelter. Impoundment, adoption, and quarantine. Impounded animal may be claimed during normal business hours upon payment of fees, veterinary expenses, compliance with vaccination and microchip provisions. It is unlawful for a person to fail to pay these impoundment fees. An animal impounded at least 2 times within a 60-day period or 3 times in a consecutive 12-month period will receive a microchip implant at their cost of $15. After the 4th impoundment in a 12-month period, the Animal Services may petition the judge for a hearing to determine if the animal is a public nuisance, and the judge may order adoption, euthanasia, exclusion from the city, or return to owner. An animal becomes city property if not reclaimed by an owner after being held 72 hours if the animal does not have identification, 120 hours if an animal does have identification. Adoptions of dogs and cats, an owner must have proper facilities to contain or care for an animal, including food, shelter, and veterinary care. It's unlawful for a prospective owner to fail to have the animal sterilized or provide proof of sterilization within 30 days of adoption or a specified date. The animal services manager may extend that time period based on scheduling with the veterinary clinic for such surgeries. Again, enforcement, offenses, notice to appear, and penalty sections added to ensure that the ordinances are prosecutable. The next steps would hopefully be that you consider and approve Ordinance 2154, and we'd like to have the second reading of the ordinance, if you so deem, on April the 2nd. Clarifying questions?
I have one question, Catherine. On the Tesla owners now have the ability to have their pets inside their car and keep the air conditioning running?
Yes.
So how would that fall within your ordinance?
As long as the animal is not showing signs of distress, it's not in a situation where, for example, it was on a leash tied and it got itself tangled up. As long as the health, safety, and welfare of the animal is maintained, we would not make entry or see that as a violation of the ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
Also, just to add to that, since you have a Tesla, when you do that mode there on the screen, it shows like a picture that lets an outsider who walks by know that that dog or animal is in that condition. So it's not like they just have the dog in there. You also see this flashing thing that shows up, so
Right.
that way you know that. So I thought that's kind of neat.
That is very cool.
They may be the first company who's doing this, but I bet you that as the cars progress, they're all going to start doing
I bet
that. So
they'll all-
it's not
we
just
can
going to be.
hope that they'll all follow suit.
Yeah. So.
Thank you. Councilmember Mitchell?
I just wanted to say, this is not necessarily a clarifying question, but thank you, because I do think the clarification you put in makes it much clearer. I know how much you love these animals. I am curious, how many times have we had an animal more than 4 times?
You would be surprised.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? Councilmember McCutcheon?
Thank you. Yeah, I just had a question for the ordinance modifications. Were there any, I don't know, guidance that we got from any particular source or any sort of outside legal counsel that specializes in animals, things like this?
We actually, when we did it, the first thing we did was a lot of research. My staff and I kind of knew where our problem areas were, so we went out and looked at other city ordinances. You know, we have the ability, thank goodness, to go to training, so we were able to, you know, talk to other people. They do hold workshops on ordinances, and we have a lot of publications in the industry that talk about ordinance revisions. We have the legislative things that come up, so we're always looking at those, trying to see, okay, so what's going in front of the legislative session? Is that something that we need to be concerned about? Maybe we need to look at that. We talked a lot with our prosecutor, and of course, our wonderful legal department helped us as well, and they did a lot of research and looked into a lot of other city ordinances to kind of help us work through those problem areas that we had.
Wow, that was very broad, yeah. Thank you.
Councilmember Porter?
Thank you. Catherine, the 120-hour window, we have a lot of people in our city who have parents that they have to fly a very long way to see, or family members. And I know from being on our HOA, some people can be gone 2 weeks, 3 weeks. They pay a lot of money, take a lot of time to get there. And if they boarded their animal while they were gone and the animal somehow got out and we got it, they may not be back in 120 hours. You may not be able to contact them in 120 hours. So if you could give that scenario some thought before we get to the, I guess, second hearing.
I can answer that right now. Our boarding facilities are very few and far between in the city limits of Sugar Land. But I will say, like Lone Star that's in Missouri City, a lot of the vet clinics in our area are very good about reporting if they ever have an animal go missing, and that is very few and slim when an animal actually goes missing from a boarding facility. As far as people that maybe have a pet sitter or they have a family member babysitting, those people are usually the first people that are panicked when they go to the house and the animal's not there because they know they're in really big trouble. And that happens a lot. You would be surprised how many people are out of the country and their animals end up at the shelter, and they're either traced through a loss report that the pet sitter or family member has done, or a microchip. So yes, it does happen, but if an animal is properly ID'd as it should be, and the person that's in care is a caring, compassionate person, which seems to be the case, they will fill out those loss reports, and then that animal is very easily reclaimed. Where we run into problem a lot of times are animals that people come in and maybe don't tell the truth and they surrender that are from other jurisdictions. And that's why we're really adamant about making sure that we scan each and every animal. We check our lost reports. We have about 6 websites that automatically update us anytime there's a lost and found report done. You know, I have several staff members that live in the community, so they're always checking next door if anything comes in. So we're very proactive in making sure that we are not harboring an animal that potentially has an owner there.
Yeah, okay, I just didn't want anybody to come home and have a bad surprise.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, Councilmember Lane?
Hi. I just want to thank you for all of your care and love and hard work that you put into this, and all the people that you draw in to help and do all of your research. And I'm so proud of our Animal Services Center because we can really set the standard for the county on how we do that. And I do appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, no other questions. I'll entertain a motion. Thank you, Councilmember Mitchell. Thank you, Councilmember Gandhi. All vote at this time, and that's not the correct one, right? That one is. Look on my page. Okay, that's the correct ordinance. Please vote on that one. Okay, and it passes unanimously with Mayor Zimmerman absent. I would also like to thank Catherine and also the Animal Shelter Board, who they have done a wonderful job working on this, and I know it took a lot of hours. So it's going to make our community safer, and so our animals safer, and so we greatly appreciate it. Thank you. Okay. This time we're going to move on to 6A, public hearings. Public hearing at 6 p.m., so obviously we've passed that. We're going to receive and hear all persons desiring to be heard on the City of Sugar Land Ordinance Number 2153, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Sugar Land, Texas, adopting standards of care for the City of Sugar Land Parks and Recreation Department's regional youth programs. And this is Dave Berkeley, our Recreation Coordinator. Dave?
Thank you. It's this time of year again already. Good evening, Madam Mayor Pro Tem and members of City Council. You guys have heard my spiel a couple of times before. I'll try and breeze through it pretty quick for you, answer any additional questions you have, okay? So once again, this is our standards ordinance for our summer day camp program that we have at the Recreation Center. Your simple background is the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services does have minimum guidelines. They're statewide guidelines that we follow. Typically, the majority of ours exceed what the minimum guidelines are. Basically, what we're stating with this updated ordinance, if you remember from last year, got a very thorough legal overview with many comparisons from local municipalities. It's basically saying that we are not a certified daycare program. We are a city recreation day camp, okay? And basically, what this does is basically have you guys approve this ordinance, and then basically our standards are made, provided to the public. That's done in print with our registration on the website, and then also posted at our recreation center. So the broad overview of what's in there, those are your 4 main categories. It covers just a little bit of everything, your monitoring, enforcement, enrollment, how they enroll, basically the requirements and staffing that we have, not only for myself, but for our City of Sugar Land camp counselors, our operations as far as our ratios for counselors to campers, the different type of programming, and then pretty thorough on the health and safety standards that we have utilizing our program sites. So you've seen this slide before many times as well. We're here. We'd like you to adopt this lovely ordinance so we can continue with our programming and have another great summer. And then, like I said, we'll file for exemption, with basically just making it available to the public. Here's your token picture. If you're keeping count, this is my 3rd year in front of council, my 4th summer. The counselors have been in purple, neon pink, neon green, and this summer will be neon yellow. I like them to stick out. So those are all their smiling faces there. I'm sure you recognize where that's at.
Okay, so this time we're going to open the public hearing. Is there anybody here who would like to come up and speak on this item? Okay, second call. Hearing none, we're going to close the public hearing and move on to questions. Are any questions? Once again, this is something that we do every single year before we start summer camp. Thank you, Councilmember Mitchell. Who said second? Councilmember Gandhi, thank you. Any further discussion? You can vote at this time. Passes unanimously. Thank you. Look forward to the summer camp.
Stop by anytime, preferably when we go to Typhoon, Texas or something fun. You know, always a good time to audit. Just saying.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Council.
We're going to move forward to item 7A, workshop review of and discussion on the City of Sugar Land Fire EMS fiscal year 2018 annual report. And it's our new fire chief. They don't put Doug down. They put Joseph.
Joseph, yes,
Joseph.
I attempted to get that changed at the last minute, but even as fire chief, you don't have that kind of authority.
Okay.
So I'm forever Joseph Boker now.
Okay.
So, it's a cruel joke my parents played on me. They named me Joseph, but they called me by my middle name. But I always know when a telemarketer's calling, so. So good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Mayor Pro Tem, Council, Mr. Bogard. It's my pleasure to address you this evening, but moreover, I'm humbled and filled with pride to be able to represent the 132 members of the Sugar Land Fire and EMS Department as we present our FY18 annual report to Council. Being that I am the new fire chief and sometimes have a problem staying within the lines when I color, I've taken a bit of artistic license with the presentation tonight, and we're going to talk about our performance and then a plan going forward. So we're about 5 months into my placement as fire chief, and we've been very, very busy. And it's not me, it's we have been very busy, and I want to share what your fire department has been up to. As we look at the performance, we're going to look at what we did in FY18 and the impacts of that performance, and then what we're learning from that and how we're using that to get better in our future performance. We're looking more at data than we ever have and seeing what the impact to the citizen is with that. We're looking at key performance indicators to make sure that we're reaching our service commitments to the citizens. And moreover, we're looking at the return on investment from every dollar that we spend. So getting right into the nuts and bolts of what we do, you'll see that we ran 9,392 calls for service last year, which was a 6% increase over the previous year. Now, it's important to note that with annexation, we've put some notes there in the bottom. So in December, we, along with other departments in the city, assisted in the annexation of about a third of the population in Sugar Land. And interestingly, the fire department already served all of those areas for fire and other services. So the only service that we had added to what we did for that area is the EMS transport service. So as we attempted to determine exactly what the impact of annexation was, we've noticed that there's a 16% increase in our EPCRs, which is the record that is done by the ambulance crew when they transport a patient to the hospital. And factoring in a 6% general growth, we find that the impact of annexation is about 10% on our ambulance side. Further interesting to that is that for every ambulance transport, because of the way we do business, we've actually seen a reduction on the fire side that we would have first responded into that area for the county. We use the dispatch does an excellent job of doing medical prioritization when they take a 911 call in. And so we've been able to right-size those responses with our resources. In responding to those 9,392 calls, that created 11,915 unique unit responses. In the past, we've reported how many EMS calls as a percentage went by themselves, an ambulance without an engine. And I want to steer away from that, because what we're attempting to do is send the right number of resources every time we go. And sometimes it's more and sometimes it's less. But we do a really good job in Sugar Land of making sure that we're supporting the crews going and the customer at the other end. Right away when we'll say at a house fire, when we're dispatched to a structure fire, we enable our battalion chiefs to make the call as to what the resource requirement is based on the information, and right-size that response by adding or decreasing units, and most importantly, decreasing the mode of transportation. So not every transportation, every response that we're going to is not always emergency traffic. That reduces the risk to both our responders and the public, and that's good business. As we look at the call breakdown, you'll see about 68% of our business is EMS, and that's commensurate with past years. Our fire activity is up. You'll see we ran 236 fire calls, and largely that's up because of grass fires in a single month. With the pollen that fell last year, we were chasing grass fires. In the middle column, in the dark blue box, 23 structure fires that we responded to, and that's a slight increase from last year where we responded to 21. The year prior, we were at 17. We see just a few years back, we were at 30. So this is within the ebbs and flows of business. We always take fire serious, and we're looking at the root cause of those fires. As we look at the fire breakdown, the 236 calls referenced in the fire, there's something here that should grab your attention, and I want to talk you off the cliff when you look at this. As we look at structure fires in the city, we go to 23 of them, and when we look at mutual aid, there's 46 of them. So we're going to double the calls outside of our city for structure fires that we do inside the city. That's good business, by the way. I have a whole slide that I want to talk about our mutual aid agreements and why that works for us. The idea I'm trying to get across is the sleepy little town of Sugar Land is not as sleepy as we sometimes think it is. These guys dressed in blue work very hard for us to keep us safe, and I'm trying to build the picture of actually what their performance is for us. And we're going to go over the mutual aid here in just a little bit. You see the grass fire, 68 grass fires, 48 of those were in a single month, actually within about a 3-week period, where we were running non-emergency to these grass fires, usually in a median, to make sure that it was out. So that's a large amount of the increase on fire side. As we look at data, sometimes we have a data analyst now, and what we've charged her with doing is measuring everything. Don't wait for us to tell you to measure it. If it seems interesting, measure it. And so sometimes we look at it and we say, well, it's interesting, but it doesn't really tell us anything. Sometimes we look at it and we're like, okay, well, we kind of knew Fire District 1 was our busiest. And Fire District 1 is like Main Street, the Imperial area, down Brooks to Highway 6. That's our busiest district for both fire and EMS. And obviously our busiest apparatus then are at Station 1. That helps us start making decisions when we have limited resources. Where do we put those resources in those interim periods? When we look further, we find that March and September were our busiest times. Evening from about 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. is when we're most likely to have a structure fire, and Mondays were the day that kind of stood out. What we do know is Monday through Friday are our busiest times. So weekends tend to be a bit slower. But now that we're measuring things, we know that statistically in Sugar Land, if you're going to be involved in a fire, you're going to be at home in the evening. And so as we look at the next slide here in the middle section, we wonder, wow, what are people doing at home in the evening? And we find that most fires start in the kitchen or in the garage. And so that helps us in our public education arena. Instead of doing what we've always done or what we're used to doing, we can start marketing our public education services where we see need. In residential fires, we tend to have fires based on behavior. Commercial fires tend to be mechanical in nature. And so we address those by code enforcement. Residential fires we address with public education. You'll see our average response time is 6 minutes and 36 seconds, and our second unit is generally on location within 1 minute and 27 seconds. One thing we're attempting to do, especially in District 2, which would be Covington and Barrington, and District 6, which is Greatwood, we're utilizing ambulances in our fire response to add value. So as we speak, we're equipping ambulances with water supply tools so one member of the ambulance company can meet the engine as they arrive at the hydrant and secure the water supply for them. The driver of the ambulance will get it out of the way and they begin incident command. So they're doing a 360, catching utilities and doing instant recon. So that way we're able to have an engine company show up at the scene of a fire ready to work, and they have good recon and a water supply. When we talk about fires, let me just start by saying any fire in your house is a big deal. Any fire in your house is a big deal. And so I don't want to make light of a minor fire or a major fire. Any fire is a traumatic event for that family. But as we look at society at large in the city of Sugar Land, we have to be able to see what our losses really are. And so last year we toyed with this idea, and this year we've built onto it a little bit. We look at the fire spread, which is a national fire incident reporting system term that we actually report to the government. Object of origin, room of origin, floor of origin. Obviously, if you can keep it to the object of origin is better. Floor of origin, not quite as good. Building of origin, sometimes that doesn't even happen. I'll just tell you, in Sugar Land, we've kept everything to the building of origin this year. Fire control, that's the amount of time it takes to put the emergency under control. So a lot of fires we go to, it's kind of a big deal, but with our trained responders, in just a very short amount of time, they can put the situation under control. Doesn't mean the fire's out. It means it's not going anywhere, it's not getting any worse, and lives aren't at stake any further. Time on scene is a bit subjective. We hold our firefighters to a much higher standard for customer service than almost any other fire department that I'm aware of. So we might leave an engine company on scene for hours to get that house back in a livable condition because it's the right thing to do for that citizen. It's not necessarily because it was such a bad fire. If someone has a kitchen fire and they put a dry chem extinguisher off in there, that's a big deal. It takes hours to clean that up, and if you don't clean it up, you don't do it right, everything in your house will rust relatively soon. So our guys will regularly do the right thing and clean that house for them. So that's why that's a bit of a subjective matter. So we've used the next box, total unit hours, to help us with that, so that when we leave a single engine company on scene to do the right thing versus when we're using 4 or 5 engine companies for prolonged periods of time, that's a better indicator that this was a major fire. So now that I've gone through the index, I'll show you what our activity was last year. More than half of our fires were minor or moderate. And let me paint a picture of what a minor fire is. Again, every fire in your house is a big deal. But if you have a cooking incident and you go to the phone to call 911, and while we're en route, that fire gets out of the grease on the stove and gets into the cabinet above the stove, our responders come in with a water can, a pressurized extinguisher, and they put that fire out. That's a minor fire. A major fire for us, the worst fire we had last year, was a single unit of an 8-unit townhouse complex. It was a mechanical natured fire. Our units got there, held the fire to the unit of origin, and within a timely manner, all the other 7 units were tenable. That's the worst fire we had. Our fire mix, well, let me go to the next slide here, I'll show you. Our fire mix across the city is fairly even in distribution. What this could tell us is we have clustering, where we have the same fire occurring in certain neighborhoods, and we don't see that. Last year we had 3 commercial fires, the balance was residential, and 2 of those were multifamily. The worst of the fire is the dark red, the green are the minor fires. Now we're back to this mutual aid. You'll see we called for mutual aid 62 times, we provided it 82 times, and in those 82 times we responded to 46 fires. When we give mutual aid, we have the first right of refusal. When somebody calls, it's a request for us to send mutual aid, and we only do it when it's good for our citizens. When we have the resources to give, we do it because it's the right thing to do for our neighbors. But if we're ever fighting our own fires or we're inundated with our own calls, per the agreement, we can say no. When we request mutual aid, we'll get from 1 to 8 units of mutual aid. Most recently at Telfair, we had 8 units from other departments. For us to maintain that staffing level at all times to be able to respond to that caliber fire would cost us an additional $6 million in personnel per year. So the leverage that we have in our risk sharing with our other communities is good for our business. I'm sorry. You'll see in EMS, prior to annexation, on average, we were calling for Fort Bend County EMS 19 times per month to help us out with service. Since then, we've backed that down to about 2.5 times per month. And largely, to be completely honest, that 2.5 times that we call them each month is usually connected with a training event where we're taking on-duty crews out of service to provide some kind of training. And because of the location of where that training is, it's sometimes better to call Fort Bend in. So training continues to be one of those areas that is an unfunded mandate to us, but we have to do it. As we look at our goal measures on response time, the goal is to arrive at every emergency within 8 minutes and 30 seconds, 80% of the time. And you'll see the blue line that goes horizontal is in EMS. You'll see we're fairly consistent on EMS. There's a couple reasons we're good at EMS. Is one, the sample size is huge. There's an even distribution of EMS calls across the city. And we have not only ambulances responding, but on occasion we have fire trucks responding too. So that the units going in or out were much more likely to hit our mark. On the fire side, you can see that's a whole lot less predictable for us. The jagged line, and we know why that's problematic for us. One, it's a small sample size. On occasion, we might have as few as 8 fire calls in a single month. So if you miss the mark on one call, you cannot meet the measure. Secondly, a lot of times on our fire calls, those aren't fixed address calls. It'll be a car fire on the freeway at Sweetwater. Well, that's Sweetwater to the guy on the phone that looks up and sees the sign that says Sweetwater, but it's actually 2 miles down the road. We have our responders in 50 to 80,000 pound trucks. They don't turn around quickly. So when we get on the freeway at the wrong spot, it's a big deal. So many times to find a car fire, that we have a bad address, it just takes a long time to get there. The important part there is what we consider to be our life safety fires generally is associated with structure fires. And so I've highlighted in the box there, 91.3% of our structure fires we met the mark on. And let's talk about the 8.5% or so that we didn't meet it. Those were both the same day. It was during a heavy weather event to where you could literally see 15 to 20 feet outside your engine, outside the windshield of your vehicle. And we had 2 structure fires at the exact same time, both lightning strikes. With that, we utilized mutual aid. Neither of those fires that had the long response time are our major fires. Our responders got there, did the right thing, and were able to put that fire under control despite the delay in response. When we shift over to EMS, we look at a couple of the highest acuity. So acuity just means serious. So we go to about 6,400 EMS calls, and they're all important. It's kind of like a house fire. When it's your house, it's a big deal. When you're calling 911, you don't ever think it's a minor emergency. But of those, there's about 250 that are really important to us. So we look at cardiac arrests, we look at suspected strokes or cardiovascular accidents, and then STEMIs, which is ST elevation myocardial infarction. It's a fancy way of saying heart attack, but it's a special kind of heart attack. And we're looking for our responders to recognize especially stroke and STEMI and call those codes early and get off scene, because there's not a whole lot we can do on scene for that, and our partnership with the hospitals is very important. One of the areas we're going with in stroke this year is stroke severity scaling. We have primary stroke centers in Sugar Land, and there is working with our SetTrack partners, there's a stroke severity scaling analog that we're going to, or algorithm we're going to start following in the coming year to make sure we're taking our stroke victims to the appropriate destination. Cardiac arrest has always been load and go, but the latest technology on that is stay and play now. And so we'll be empowering our crews to stay on scene. Everything that ER can do, we can do on scene. We have a highly a well-equipped ambulance and a highly skilled crew that's there. And sometimes it's best to just invest our time on scene and for the first 30 minutes to see if we can get a ROSC on that. And ROSC stands for return of spontaneous circulation. That's a big deal for us. We meet about the national average, and it fluctuates 30, sometimes as low as 25 to 40%. We've started some initiatives in this area. Been doing a lot of training. I'm so happy to report that last month we had a 77% ROSC rate. Out of 9 CPR victims, 7 gained spontaneous circulation. That I cannot promise that we'll do that next month, but those guys in blue are working really hard for you. 64% of our EMS calls result in transports. The rest of them were able to either fix their problem on scene, or they decide that we're able to kind of talk them down as to what's going on, and they decide they don't want to go. 56% of our CPRs have pre-arrival CPR by bystanders. And while that seems impressive, it's not. About 51% of our highest acuity calls come out of healthcare facilities. And so we should expect better from healthcare facilities, that we're sending our people to go work there with their patients. So we want to interface with those facilities to make sure that they're providing the care to their patients. And then we'll work with the public for the non-healthcare facility CPRs to try and get public bystander CPR up. And then last year we had 83 cardiac arrests, and I'll remind you, just last month I was here for your approval to get a SetTrack donation for life bands. That's the calls that those are used on. And so last year, 83 of them, not those are now in stock. We picked them up, and perhaps you saw it in social media where we picked up a pallet of life bands, which saved the city $17,000. From the time we leave the scene of a 911 call, it takes us about 6 minutes and 10 seconds to get to an ER. All of our hospital destinations are up from previous years. The one that went up the most is Memorial Hermann Sugar Land, and that's a direct result of annexation as we pick up customers in that area. That's their local hospital, so that's up about 30%. The rest are up commensurate to our call increases. We called for Lifeline 14 times this year, which for an agency our size is fairly moderate. It is up from last year. We called 9 times last year. As we look at the EMS, where our calls are, this looks like a measles map, but that's every EMS call that we ran last year. And so we look at this to say, well, how do we plan from this, and how do we do better? And we see that where there's areas of high density population or travel corridors, our calls are up, but the rest of it's a fairly even distribution. So we put a little heat map to it, and we see that now we start to see that there's areas that are a little hotter than the rest for EMS. And this helps us plan when we're down a few units for the day. And so, interestingly, all of those darker areas coincide with healthcare facilities. And so what we did further is let's look at just the highest acuity calls. Those are the cardiac arrests, the strokes, and STEMIs. And we find this is staggering. 19% of our highest acuity calls come out of 16 individual addresses. So that's a real opportunity for us to go to those specific addresses to address patient care, so that we, one, have the relationships when we get there, that there's a seamless transfer of care, and two, that we help educate that staff on the right things to do in emergency conditions. So what's our plan going forward? We're focusing on 3 different areas. One's vision, one's cultural shift, and the third is alignment. A vision is it's a destination. It's somewhere for if you're a stakeholder to this organization to be able to look out 18, 24 months and know what winning is. That's the destination. And we didn't have a shared vision currently. So for now, we're going to operate under my vision. It's my hope that when I come back for fiscal year 19's annual report, that I'll be able to present a shared vision that the entire fire department and all the stakeholders of our department have shared input on. But for now, we're going to do it my way, and I'm going to lead an engaged workforce towards improvement. And what you see there, you were all the recipient of a card when you showed up to council today. This was a project I did with middle management of the fire department, that if it's your fire department, what do you value and how do we get there? And this was a word art that Lieutenant Meyer put together with the results of that practice that we did. In the cultural shift, I want to talk about that picture for a minute. I'm going a little off script. Our union president built that at home on his own time. That's one of 3 bulletin boards that we have in administration right now. And I invite you, you're always invited to swing by, but I specifically invite you to come look at our bulletin boards. We have 3 of them, one with the patch, one with the American flag, and one with the association logo. And I'm very proud of that because it was a cooperative project between the fire department and the association, and it's everything that's right with what we do. One board we're using exclusively for our business, one we're using for our money, and the other's for our attaboys. So if anybody that works in the fire department, you're curious what the business plan is, go to the board. If you want to know where we spend our money, go to the board. If you want to see who's done a good job, go to the 3rd board. So in our culture shift, we're encouraging open conversations. If you have a question, ask. If you're asked a question, don't get defensive. It's just a conversation. We've opened up our meetings. I've changed from command staff and general staff meetings. We now have an action meeting on Monday. So if you want to enact a project in the fire department, come to the action meeting, and it's open. Anybody can come. We're looking for a consensus product. So it's no longer acceptable to not know what's going on with your fire department. The action meetings are Monday, and that's where you'll learn what's going on. On Wednesdays, we have information meetings, and that's where we share what's going on within the fire department. We include our business partners from across the city. So whether it's fleet or facilities or IT or HR, they Skype into our meetings, and everybody knows what's going on. We're celebrating our successes. I was really proud to be able to get the Model T here today. Danny Kutzik went out of his way to, one, make sure it's running. It's 100. I can't keep my daughter's 10-year-old Jeep running, and he consistently gets a 100-year-old Model T fired up for us. So, but that's part of a success for us, is celebrating our history. The enhanced programs that our crews are putting on for Mayor's Youth Advisory Council, I was sad to see them leave. Those guys got a rock star performance from those guys when they came to our fire station, and we burned stuff, we cut up cars, we sprayed water, and it was fun. And we did the same with 101. We had a participant in 101 with almost a mini skirt and 3-inch heels with safety glasses and leather gloves cutting up a fender of a wrecked car. That's interactive government right there, and these guys make it possible. Involving those business partners, we involve finance at every stage of our planning. We're working cooperatively with Public Works when it comes to connectivity issues right now. IT is very involved in a lot of our central planning, and so getting them involved earlier and often into our planning makes a better product. We're educating our workforce, and by golly, they got a good dose of what I do on Tuesday nights. You guys came to a good meeting, but this is about average. You want to know something about water? I know something about water. We're engaging the community from the Model T to the MIAC events. This is their fire department. We want them to be involved. We want them to know what's going on. Finally, we get to the man in the arena. That's a Roosevelt quote, and it just says, it's easy to sit in the stands and yell at the players. I'm getting everybody onto the field. This is our fire department, and it's going to be good because we're all working hard in it. Further alignment, the strategic vision of the city in 2032, we play a critical role in safest city, fiscal responsibility, and mobility. We want to make sure that our operations are in line with that. We've changed the structure of our fire department to look at core service areas to the customer. Instead of divisions of the fire department, we have service areas that either support an internal customer or finally the emergency services area that supports the exterior customer. We've renewed our service commitments, so we know exactly what we're supposed to be doing. We've done things forever just because we always did it, but we never really knew why. More importantly, we never knew how to measure whether we were doing it well or not. So that's the next step, is building performance measures into the service commitments that we currently have. And finally, we did a gap analysis across the fire department, and we have 56 current projects, many of which are being harbored at the firefighter level. We find somebody with the technical expertise to run with it, and then we give them the authority to act on it. We continue to work on communications. The harder we try, the more we hear that we need to know more. And so Chief Crespo's transferred over temporarily into admin, and one of his charges is to be the communication officer. So he sends out the A&I report, the action and information, and it's kind of the minutes of the fire department for the week. So that in real time you can keep up with what your fire department's doing. We've charged Chief King with compliance. We've moved her out of a sole EMS function. We've moved Chief Harrod into EMS under the clinical side. Chief King maintains the EMS administrative side and the compliance function for the entirety of the fire department. So that's TCFP, EEOC, TWC, and DISH. We've renewed our training efforts. For the first time in a long time, we have a dedicated training calendar not a calendar, but a plan. And we've looked across every segment of our business. What do we need to do to make sure we have somebody ready to provide that service today? And then how do we make sure we have somebody ready tomorrow? So this year we're focusing on today, and we've got a multi-page list of classes. We're prioritizing our spending, and we're making sure we get a return on the investment for every dollar we spend on training. We have a gear purchasing philosophy, which I'm guilty of. I'm late on it. He should have had it already, but it's my fault. But with this gear purchasing philosophy, we're identifying to city management what the personal protective equipment needs are of the fire department, and we're laying that out over a series of 5-year periods, all the way to 2032 is where it is now. We'll go further. but it's for each FTE in that fire department. The name might change, somebody retires and somebody else comes in, but we know where that gear's coming from. We know what the cost of it is and how we're going to earmark that. There's a part in there of the plan that talks about what we pay for out of our O&M schedule versus what comes through a special purchase. And then finally, wellness. Cancer awareness is huge in the fire service, and everything we thought we knew about cancer is we're getting proven that we don't know. This nanotechnology, we thought we were doing good by wearing air packs and telling our guys wear air packs in overtime, or in overhaul, I'm sorry. But what we find is the particulate size is so small that it's going through vapor barriers of the gear. So when we have these guys in a full smoky environment, the gear that we're giving them may or may not be protecting them long term. So we want to get in front of this, and I'll just be honest, getting in front of it at this point is not making knee-jerk reactions and going to a clean cab that's not truly proven, or second hoods. It might be we're wearing the wrong hood is what I'm led to believe after a visit to San Marcos yesterday. We're working with Coral Springs and San Marcos to try and figure out what the industry is doing in this. But we want to make sure we're protecting our responders. Finally, we're using data to make sure we're doing the right thing. In our outreach, we talked about CPR. I want to get out in front of the public and renew our CPR. And matter of fact, just today we solidified our relationship with SETRAC that on May 18th we're hosting a regional Stop the Bleed class. That's an important aspect of community preparedness. If somebody needs Stop the Bleed activities, they can't wait for their fire department to get there. There has to be someone there first to take care of that. Mass casualty coordination, you see we're doing a lot of work with the PD, mainly on the active shooter side. We've done cooperative drills with police department already at this time, and we worked through the SWAT team to earmark equipment that we've gone out for a grant for. And then finally, incident-based programming. Statistically, if you're over 60 and you fall and break your hip, you have about 18 months to live, and it'll cost society $250,000 to get you there. So every time that we can go out and prevent that one fall, we're increasing quality of life and we're saving society some money. So we need to be in our senior facilities doing fall prevention. And then senior initiatives, whether it's flu season, pool safety, or even turkey fryers in the holiday season. These are things that we ought to be in front of. If we can just reduce the incidence of those emergencies, just a few, it pays off. For our employees, we're starting to track their performance. So whether it's an IV or an ET tube or an IO, we see what each person's doing and we retrain them when we see the need. Furthermore, we can look forward at we look backwards at our historic calls and then look forward to the season. And so we know respiratory calls will go up in the fall. We should be stocking up our logistics in the late summer and be training our people in July so they're ready for that first cold snap. That's smart government. Speaking of training our people, we're very appreciative of city management's support of the public safety training facility. We continue to work with Lane Wolf on the infrastructure that's going in at that area. You see a rendering of a building. This is what we're using for our RFP that we're sending out here very soon to look for pricing for a burn structure like this. We anticipate being in this building in early November and starting to do our training in the city. Right now, we're going several miles out of the city with in-service trucks, and that's just a hard endeavor. You'll see also our Project 1902 is our fire and EMS commitment from the city management. We've ordered the first round of training supplies. We're in the process of ordering our second round, which includes training mannequins for our high acuity patients to improve our EMS skills and training. We'll continue our public outreach, but you'll see that we've always been intensive on the fire side. We're going to broaden our horizons here and look at the EMS and life safety side as well in the coming year. There's a lot when it comes to code enforcement. We talked about our fire prevention and code enforcement areas. There's a lot of projects, and what we find is that new construction takes more time of our code enforcement people than old construction. And so as we're still actively building, we struggle to meet all of the service commitments and mandates in that area. Looking at our development data, I've made a list here of my chief concerns for the next year. Code enforcement, we just talked about. We're not currently meeting our service commitment. Our service commitment is lighter than the International Fire Code, and we're not able to meet that. And so we're going to shunt some resources in the fire department to try and meet that. We're going to look at our staffing plans to make sure we're doing things right there. I'm going to ask these guys in blue to take on another job of doing some safety inspections, not a formal regulatory inspection, but just a safety inspection so that we can at least have somebody in that building with some regularity. And then we'll build an entire picture of what really fixes that area. And when we figure it out, right now it's kind of working for us, but when we figure out what the ideal is, you'll be amongst the first to hear. We're going to review our hiring ratios. So we have minimum staffing that's set, but then we need to make sure that we're hiring enough people to meet that minimum staffing with the benefit burden that comes along, and that's inclusive of vacation, sick leave, but then also military leave, FMLA, that I'm not sure that we're hiring the right number of people to fill the minimum staffing, but I don't want to just react too quickly. We're going to do a study, make sure that we're bringing good information forward on that. We're going to continue to watch cross-staffing. As a reminder, we cross-staff out of one station currently, that's Station 7, and that we do that because it provides geographic advantage to the first caller of 911. Most cross-staffing programs, it's when they're out of ambulances, they'll take an engine and put it into an ambulance. For certain geographic areas right now, we're sending the crew in that station. They'll either go in the engine or they go in the ambulance, whichever one's the right unit for the next call, and they serve that customer. We're going to watch and make sure there's not unintended consequences to that, and it doesn't delay other responses to the area. Pet medical. We haven't had a fire fatality in Sugar Land since the 90s, but we lose pets every year. And so I'm going to, I've already asked Animal Petopia to help us with this. They're getting us a lead for some pet medical equipment and then a connection with a vet where we're going to provide some cross training for our staff to be able to address at least dogs and cats for the immediate future. There are some exotics out there that I don't know we're ready to dive into just yet, but this year we did lose a single dog, and our crews found it in the secondary the same as they would have a human. The human would have got more care. They weren't equipped to take care of that dog. And then finally, specialized responses, and whether that's active shooter that we continue to prepare for or water events such as Harvey, I want to make sure that we solidify our response plans, our training, our policies, and our equipment in that area. We were the lucky department to have the Employee of the Year. Now, I'll just tell you, Warren's a great guy, and he works not only for the fire department, but he works for the SWAT team too, so PD kind of owns him. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say there's 132 members of the fire department. I feel comfortable that if we were able to represent the other 131 to Mr. Bogard, that each of them, with their special contributions to the city, could have been Employee of the Year. So let's talk about those guys before we go any further. I have a lot of guys, so we had 6 engine companies out of our 7 that wanted to come tonight. And so Chief Vance had to make some tough decisions who could come. Talking about mutual aid, we have Stafford in one of our stations right now and Pecan Grove in another helping us with this. This is important. This is their fire department. They need to know how this happens. And we'll reciprocate to those stations, to those other departments when it's their time to do this. I'm horrible with names, so I have, out of everything I've talked about, I brought notes with names. So I just want to address, first and foremost, I want to address the association. Our association has worked very hard with us to find common ground. What we find is 9 out of 10 things we agree on, and there's no need to beat each other up on those. And we'll have tough conversations in the future, but it's going to be just that, a conversation. And so we're joined by Tommy Holliday, Sean Gutierrez, Aaron Armijo, Scott Bowerman, and Dave Brown, a past president. Jonathan Vance, who is the secretary, was supposed to be here. I'm telling you, we employ some top-notch guys. Jonathan Vance got called today. He's over at the fire in Deer Park because that's the caliber employee that we have. SetTrack deployed him, and that's a reimbursement agreement that we have with them because he's that kind of employee that other people want to use him. Just like we loan Tommy Holliday out constantly for planning. That's the caliber of employee in your fire department. We have several stations here. Battalion Chief Jared Vance is here. Ladder 2, we have Captain Eric Volkman, Firefighter Dwayne Kutosh, and Firefighter Christian Colella. Medic 2, and some of them might have had to leave on calls. I'm sorry.
Come stand up.
Yeah, come on, guys. Stand up. All right. Medic 2, Jay Lambert and Jacob Varner. And Ladder 4, we have Lieutenant Calverley. John Cotton is the engineer, and Jacob Martin is the firefighter. John Cotton, I'll remind you, is an Olympic gold medalist. If you didn't know that, in 1980, he played on the baseball. 2000?
There is really not much we can do except put them out. There's not anything we can do to prevent them. There's houses, there are things like fire, smoke detectors. But
Yeah, car fires are problematic for us for a couple of reasons. One, almost any amount of fire in a car totals the car. But then the cost to society for the mobility issue is enormous. So we're actually looking at some technological changes that will enable us to get real-time information of where that car fire or that major accident might be that helps us get our units there faster and meet our goal measures. And for every minute or so that we can clear that freeway faster, there's economic impact to it.
absolutely. I know we provided mutual aid, but how many times did we require mutual aid?
I believe the number was 62, and we provided 82. I could be off. I could go back if you want.
I think that was right.
It's fairly it's kind of in line, and the way that works out is we're in the middle. So we get it from wherever our call is. We call the closest department, but we're kind of in the middle of 5 other departments. And so our number one, the city we provide the most to is Stafford, then Missouri City, and then interesting Rosenberg, and then Richmond. And so usually, like even Houston, we mutual aided Houston 3 times last year, but it was all major accidents in that Belford area. It just kind of, we beat them there because our standard coverage is higher, and we disregard them and run their call for them.
Okay, and I think that's really important when you're talking about mutual aid, when you see how many times they've come to help us as much as we've helped them, that's a pretty big deal. And it supports what you were saying. I think your policies, your goals, everything you're trying to do, and I know this is supposed to be clarifying questions, but it's a workshop, so that really does confuse me on the clarifying versus the workshop.
I mean, what are they going to do, kick you off next month?
I'm thinking that might happen. And I'm gonna miss
Actually,
y'all.
we're taking a vote right now for immediate.
Yeah, we have so many fires and so many different things. What is the rate of injury of our firefighters?
It's very low, and actually I don't know the number, but we'll get you an FYI on it. But we track, matter of fact, it's important we track it for risk, but it's also a state requirement. Every firefighter injury that's incurred in the line of duty gets reported to the state, so it's easy for us to get that data.
And a couple of times you mentioned being down on equipment, and so you have to move things around because why are you down on equipment?
Well, what we have is our standard coverage is based on coverage when there's no calls. But once we start running calls, a CPR call will take an ambulance and an engine. A structure fire will take 5 of our fire apparatus. And so when we start moving things around, we go into a man-to-man defense to make sure we're ready for the second call.
I just wanted to make sure it's because they were in action, not because they were down out of order.
Oh, we have a great relationship with facilities and Fleet. Fleet does a great job of keeping our apparatus up and running on both the fire apparatus side and the EMS side.
And that's kind of what I expected. 3 more things. One, you know that I'm in the Exchange Club and I'm working on this spaghetti dinner. And different firefighters.
This has nothing to do with the workshop.
It has to do with them. And I'm getting somewhere. I promise I'm getting somewhere. We have like a fire department, Wharton, fire departments and police departments all over. And there is only one entity that has 3 teams, and we're looking at them. Our firefighters are out there supporting our community and making themselves visible, and that's where I was going with it. Tommy Holliday, when he saw that there were 2 different firefighter teams, said fire associations in 2. And that kind of support, plus it's going to be great spaghetti, firefighters know how to cook. So I did want to really give kudos, because that's part of your goal, is to be out there in the community, and you're really doing it, and you've got people who are willing to do it. Another thing is, and firefighter calendar, please bring it back. I've got 2013 hanging on my wall. It's old. Trent, yes, you're there, but we need some new faces, new young faces.
Councilmember Mitchell.
And last question.
Our attorney is letting us know that you're not staying on subject.
Yes. And the last thing is, what can we, as a council, other than the public safety facility, which we've been working on very hard to make, or I've made my goal in my 8 years here, what can we do for you?
City management's been very good to the fire department this year in looking outward at what our needs are. And we're benefiting from that currently as we speak, whether it's in the fire training or the EMS training. I am looking at those chief concerns that I identified. When we figure out a course of action there, right now things are working for us. What I don't want to do is make a request that's not based on good judgment and on data. And we have more data than we've ever had before. So as we continue to get a good picture of what we're doing and how we do it, we might in the future come back with a request.
Absolutely. You need to come back to whoever the council members are, since we've established I won't be here after a month or so.
After tonight.
Hey, I'm your biggest fan, okay? I love y'all, and thank you for the great job that you do. You put your lives on the line every day for us, and we really appreciate it, and you help make us the safest city, in my opinion, in the United States.
They do. You're very well served by these guys in blue.
Councilmember Gandhi?
I'll try to follow that.
You want a calendar?
Yeah, there you go. I'm good, buddy. Thank you. But can't even remember my question. All right. So number one, I wanted to congratulate you on your new position. I mean, having all these guys show up to support you, get your back, showing the unity that you guys are all working together. You really sent a message to us that things are going great, and your leadership is clearly portrayed here tonight. So appreciate it. I think last year or the prior year, we had an outside consultant who provided some data points, looking at some goal measures. Have you taken any of that information and compared it to your performance over the last year?
I think.
Or are you integrating any of that data?
So I believe you're referencing the Center for Public Safety Management, the CPSM report. Largely, we've tried to put that to bed. We implemented quite a bit of it. Some of it didn't meet our business plans. Some of it were recommendations outside of the scope of fire department practice, so we pushed some things to HR, and we pushed some to finance. The few that remained on there are now part of our 56 projects. What I didn't want to do is muddy the water with CPSM discussions when we're acting on that specific item. So we continue to use that report to our benefit, but largely the report itself we don't reference anymore.
Okay. So when we look at your performance indicators and how you guys are doing as a fire department, what is the data that we're using?
Well, currently what you're reported is goal measures, and those were adopted by City Council 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. We work with Rena Vargas's group in OPA to put performance measures together. And what I'm by the way, Kylie, you might want to listen up. What I'm asking Kylie to do is come up with a performance measure for every service commitment. And we've committed we've approved the service commitments through our city manager, Doug Brinkley. And so what we're saying is we think this is our job, and now we want to be held accountable for that. And we build a performance measure not off of what a consultant says, but what fits our city. And those will be what we judge ourselves by next year.
Okay, great. Look forward to seeing how that corresponds to one another. So thank you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, sir.
Councilmember McCutcheon?
Thank you, Madam Pro Tem. What a truly outstanding report. Very impressive. And Chief, thank you for your leadership and for the great job that you're doing. And being an engineer, I love the data analysis and the heat maps. And I found it interesting that 21% of the structure fires occur on Monday between 3 and 4. And 3 and 4 is probably people starting to work on cooking dinner. But why do you think it's Monday as opposed to another day of the week?
This is going to sound sarcastic, but I think it's Monday because it's not Tuesday. I think that's one of those things we measure that we're scratching our head. Does it mean anything to us? I think it's just happenstance. Now, Monday through Friday, we know statistically those are always our busy days. Sure. Saturday and Sunday are our slower days. But there's oftentimes Fridays are our busiest day of the week. It's just the ebbs and flows of our business.
Well, I appreciate the initiative on the pet medical as a dog owner, and I look forward to the time when the public safety training can all be done here in city without you all having to leave the city. And I'll put a quick plug in. I'm a graduate of the Citizens Fire Academy, and Trent led that when I was in there, and that is a great program. I like to encourage people to do that if they haven't done that. And I'm very much looking forward to trying the sauce at the spaghetti supper. But I just want to say thank you all so much to our fire and EMS department for putting your lives on the line and for everything you do day in, day out to keep Sugar Land safe.
Councilmember Porter?
Thank you. For a FYI consideration, I'd like to hear more about what your plan is going forward to deal with this nanoparticles cancer issue. What specific plan and kind of a schedule that you're thinking about going forward to see if we can get that sorted out sooner rather than later. That seems to be a really important thing to do.
If I might, we have a working committee assembled. Chief Fenwick is heading that, and he's looking at best practice of what the industry is doing currently. I can get the FYI together. I think it'll be short on details for some period of time just because it's such a fast-moving area of our business. But we're trying to keep up with it in real time.
Yeah, okay. You really have our support to push that fast.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned staffing, that you're going to be looking at it going forward. Do you have, this may not be a fair question, do you have some just ballpark idea of what we might be budget-wise looking at?
No, so
Just
that
a
would,
range?
that would be a premature conversation. I can tell you last year we were out of fire trucks for 34 minutes, which is 0.06% of the year. And of those 34 minutes, 21 of them we had a Richmond engine backed in, but we were out of Sugar Land units for 34 minutes. 13 minutes, I can't account for who we had where. But what I don't want to do is start making knee-jerk decisions based on 13 minutes. What we find is our mutual aid agreements are strong and we're able to leverage our risk to other communities, and that's working for us. As far as what the fix to that is, it would be a premature conversation to even guess at what that fix is.
Well, the reason I'm asking is obviously we've got many more opportunities than we have funding to address. And so it's, if something's coming that's somewhat significant, the earlier you can let us know before we commit other funds. And I guess,
I'm sorry, let me back up that last year, no single call went unanswered. So when we're talking staffing, it's not that there's a void of staffing, that the timeliness of response is occasionally delayed because we're 3 or 4 customers deep. But nobody went without service last year. There is 13 minutes. I can't account for who the next truck to go, but I can guarantee you there's another truck someplace going to go.
okay. And kind of a what have you done for me lately question. What is the biggest obstacle you see to reducing their response time?
Traffic.
Wow. So I'll just tell you, right now, response times are ugly for us because we're trying a new program, and I'm not sure that I'm going to be successful at this. We've tried dispatch prioritization so that we can take the most acute of our calls and send emergency traffic the right number of resources, and the ones that we deem less acute, we send units non-emergency. And what we're finding, dispatch is working very hard. Shannon and Amy have both worked extremely hard to try and make this program work for us. I think that probably the unintended consequence of trying to do the right thing when it comes to overall risk for the community is costing us some response time. So probably the number one thing I can do to get response time up is to review that program for efficacy. And then traffic, Councilmember Young hit the nail on the head. Traffic is in location. We don't always get good location. Dispatch tries very hard, but there's always language barriers, and then where somebody thinks they are is rarely where they really are unless they're at their house.
Has traffic ever mentioned when our traffic people that they could help you if only?
Absolutely. Matter of fact, through city administration, we're working right now with Rob Venezuela's group. They're funding a proof of concept vehicle for us with Medic 2 that helps with our connectivity. And if this works, then it will auto route our vehicles and preempt the traffic lights at each intersection downline. That's cutting edge equipment that will really, it'll shave minutes off of response and reduce risk. It takes a while, and his team in IT, Rob Bowman, are involved, and they're doing good work for us. We're along for the ride at this point. At some point, it's going to require some effort from fire, but we're following Rob and Rob's lead at this point.
Yeah. So it's moving. There's no limitations that we could do anything about.
No, it's actually moving quite fast at this point.
Well, good. Sounds like you're off to a good start, and I add my thanks to my colleagues, to you and your friends and fellow workers for what you do for the city. Thank you.
Councilmember Lane?
Well, congratulations on a very good report, and obviously you've got all of your fellow leaders here all fired up to do a really good job for our city, and I appreciate your professionalism each time you come out and respond, and treating citizens with respect and courtesy, and that's something that's part of the Sugar Land way of how we interact with our citizens is above and beyond in comparison of other cities. And so I commend you for that, and thank you for your service and always putting yourselves out there. Put yourselves out there in danger at times, and we appreciate that very much. Thank you.
And Chief, I want to let you know that I'm doing my part. I'm helping your fire numbers because I stopped cooking. Okay, so, no. But in all seriousness, I really appreciate the energy that you're bringing to this job and all the hard work that you're doing to make this a great department. But also, I want to recognize all the firemen. I know that they are so committed, and they do put themselves at risk every time there's a call. They're out there, and so we cannot tell you how much we really appreciate you keeping us safe. And we say a lot of prayers for you. Believe me, we do say a lot of prayers. And I think one of the things then is, other than all the things that you mentioned, one of the things that you mentioned I think is really critical to our community is the outreach and all the programs that you do to help our residents, the fire safety checks at their homes and smoke detectors, and all of those things are so important, and I greatly appreciate everything that you do to help educate our community, to keep people safe. There's anybody who's injured or, heaven forbid, a fatality is so devastating to our community, so we greatly appreciate that.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
If I might take one last luxury here, my report is actually over, but what I want to do is one last time recognize not only the firefighters that do the job day in and day out, but the administrative support staff, Elizabeth's team, that has been working harder than they ever have in the last 5 months. And so I want to extend a hand of congratulations to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to City Council, City Managers reports. We'll start with City Council, and I'm not going this way this time. We'll go down to Miss Jennifer Lane to start.
I have no report. We've been on spring break.
Thank you. Mr. Porter?
We hosted the Sugar Land Suburban Women at Smart Financial Center for the performance of Tyler Perry's Medea's Farewell Tour, I think is the name pronounced correctly. It was a lot of fun. Coming up, I've got a 60th year opening day celebration of Sugar Land Little League. 70 years of caring celebration for Kelsey Seabold, and a Chamber Leadership Alumni event.
Thank you. Ms. McCutcheon?
Well, Councilmember Lane and I attended the grand opening of Alicia's Mexican Grill, and they told us that the restaurant is in Richmond and the parking lot's in Sugar Land. I haven't checked that on Fort Bend CAD yet.
So did you go to the Sugar Land part?
Well, I did, but I parked in the Sugar Land part, and then I ate in the Richmond part. I said I need to check this on Fort Bend CAD to see if that's true or not. And I had a very good quarterly meeting with our city manager, and thank you for that.
Okay. Thank you.
No report to speak.
Nothing to report.
What? My gosh, okay. Well, we have our city manager report.
No report.
Okay, well.
Now make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, motion to adjourn. Thank you.
Thank y'all.